Like it took longer than a college degree to put this fucking thing together. And I'm super proud of it. I think it's the best thing we've ever done.
100%.
Also, can't wait to be done.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 512 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the localization wrangler.
I'm Sam and I'm not hashed.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is March 21st, 2020 vibes. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your recurring donations to help keep the podcast going. I want to point out it's a Power of Two episode.
I know. I felt it. I felt it when you said it. I had a tremble in my guts, you know?
512. So, of course, it's what? 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512.
Yeah,
There's some numbers, you know?
They get further and further apart, every time.
Such as the power of powers of two.
Now we're going to have to wait like a decade to get to the next Power of Two.
Yeah.
I always felt like Powers of Two also worked pretty well for like stages of life. Like my 32nd birthday felt like a big deal, much more so than my 30th. And I think there's something to that, right? Like at age 2 versus age 4, pretty different. Age 8, pretty different. 16,
very different. Yeah.
Yeah. And then then you're just kind of vibing for a while and you're figuring shit out. And then by the time you're 32, you're kind of like you're in a new stage.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's like a
And
change rate.
Yeah, it's how fast life moves, because I think
each of those periods of life feels like it takes the same amount of time.
yeah.
Like to you experience it the same.
I was actually
That's why now.
I was kind of laughing about this to myself because we've been, we're going to lead up to Crashlands 2 launch, and so last week we were 4 weeks away. So I put out a blog post and a newsletter, and I was like, "Hey, we're 4 weeks away," which to me, I was like, "Oh my god, that is like right now, basically, right?" And then in like our Discord,
I'm gonna blink and 4 weeks go by.
I'm seeing all these basically kids, who their response to it was not the same as mine, which is like, holy shit, it's like right now, And so I'm already excited because it's only 4 weeks away, which is the blink of an eye. And these kids are like, oh my god, it's so far away. A month is so long.
That's a whole lifetime.
We were just talking the other day about how, because like Sam has this 2-year-old daughter. We're working on Crashlands for like the gap between Levelhead and Crashlands 2 will be a 5-year gap just about, right? And it's like, for us, it took a long time, but it didn't feel like it took that long. No. But then for this new baby, it's 2.5 lifetimes. Like it's an unimaginable amount of time.
Twice as long as she's been alive.
Yeah. I don't know. I always thought like maybe there's a way to kind of like shortcut or short circuit that mechanism where like life just feels like it keeps going by faster and faster. Because I always thought that it was kind of related to new experiences. Like if you do the same thing all the time, then the days kind of start to blur together. Yeah. But if you're experiencing new things all the time, which of course, like the less you've experienced, the more the higher proportion. Like everything's new, right? But also like growing up, you'd have like there's all these milestones, right? Like when you started 5th grade, that felt like a big deal compared to starting 4th grade, but that also felt like a big deal.
I think it's a combination of novelty, but also like these mile marker things that kind of disappear as when you become an adult. Yeah, in a lot of ways.
There's like, no more next thing except
there's not even like a summer break. You know what I mean? Like you don't have like every summer break. Like most people you can remember pretty well actually. Like what were you doing? Like in like some of your middle school summer breaks and like I got them.
It's like the number of events.
Yes.
Right, like
it's pattern breaks is actually probably what it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We're just suddenly everything changes. Even like in back in school, you'd have like your different sports seasons, right? You'd have like your swim season and your football season and whatever.
And you'd have your school semesters or quarters.
Yeah, semesters, and you'd have your finals, and you have your break, and you have your prom or your homecoming.
Yeah, how often does everything change? Basically, the context that you're in
all the time.
Yeah.
As an adult, it's like not that often. That's actually I think what it is. In the case of like having kids, it does feel
it reintroduces that pattern break.
Because
now you're kind of vicariously experiencing, and not just their like development phases, but also like pretty soon they'll have summer break and they'll have you know all these different things happening, and like you can kind of be like, oh, like remember what it was like for you know, for it to be a big deal, like put on your backpack for the first time and get on the bus, and you're just like, oh my god.
Well, it is
I'm excited and crying.
The weird thing about the sort of fastness of time when things aren't changing is that also, and it's fast as it's happening, but in retrospect has like an indefinite kind of length to it, you know? Because if I think about like Levelhead development versus Crashlands 2 development, Levelhead development was very fast. It was 2 years, right? And so within those 2 years, there were so many things happening that were different, like month by month, different things were happening constantly. We went to early access a year and a half in or whatever, right?
We went to Nintendo HQ and got a tour.
And we went to GDC. We went to all the events that you go. Like we did so much like miscellaneous stuff during the development of that game in that short window. And then Crashlands 2 during the pandemic. We're not going anywhere. It's a huge project, and it had also had distinct phases. But each one of those phases was also long, you know. So it was like these like 6-month R&D phase where we're like working on one aspect of the tooling systems, right?
Well, and like Levelhead was the birth of Rumpus. We got an office after we started Levelhead development, and then there was a global pandemic right before we released it, so we had to shut down the office. Like a lot of shit did happen in those 2 years.
So much stuff. Because when I'm thinking back, when I think back to like Levelhead time, right? I don't have a recollection of it feeling fast necessarily. It probably still felt fairly fast, right? But it doesn't, like in my memory, it doesn't feel like the duration of time spent, you know, feels kind of similar to
Crashlands
2.
Yeah, which was 2.5 times as long. But
I think it's just the density of stuff happening was so high, you know?
We have like, we're not going because of the pandemic and stuff like that, you know, we're not going to GDC. You know, we haven't been doing that throughout Crashlands 2.
Also, GDC is happening right now. Right now. This is the last day of GDC.
So there, and like even like during the Levelhead days, that was like since we had a physical space, then we did stuff like Shenanigans, where we like, you know, we had 50-ish, you know, fans come and we did like a hang at a podcast, like a live podcast and stuff like that. It's like there's all this stuff that happened really fast, which made, in retrospect, I think you're right, made the development of Levelhead feel like it took about the same amount of time as Crashlands 2, even though it was a lot faster. So anyways, time is crazy.
Time's weird.
One of the things we have been talking about as we're weighing ideas for what to do next is something fast. That's basically
that's the short version of what we're doing. Like, who knows what it'll be, but we'll figure it out.
What are we going to make next? Fast.
Sure as fuck is going to take 5 years.
We're a palate cleanser. Actually, it's something that I don't know if listeners how aware they are of this because I had forgotten also. So we were working on original Crashlands from 2014 or
2013
to
2013. And then
it was also about 2.5 years, right? Something like that. And sort of, even though that was a much shorter project, half as long as Crashlands 2, there were aspects of like the vibe of it that were kind of the same, which is it's just a big project that kind of becomes, from a work standpoint, it's just a little more samey than something like Levelhead where stuff is changing all the time, right? And so there was a point in the middle where we were just like, we just need to do something else. You know, we just need a palate cleanser. And that's when we made Flop Rocket, Roid Rage, and some weirder ones that people are less familiar with, like Freeway Mutant. I think there's one more, right?
I will say, though, there was one
Extreme
time.
Burger Defense.
Extreme Burger Defense.
Yeah, Extreme Burger Defense. There was one time where I think it was a GDC where we were walking around with our Butterscotch shirts and somebody was like, Extreme Burger Defense. We're like, what the fuck?
It's the only place like on Earth where you can go and feel like that sort of very, very niche interaction will happen, right? Someone who's played one of your jam games basically will be like, so funny.
And Extreme Burger Defense was what? Like you have you made the best burger, the perfect burger.
It's a tower defense game. Yeah.
And you went on a picnic and then bears just start coming. Because they smell your burger.
Yep.
And then for some reason you're building like turrets and shit. One of the things that's great about making little jam games like that. Like, you remember that thing, that game? I think it's the game There's No Time to Explain.
Yeah.
Basically that the whole time. You're just like, premise, go.
You're just like, things are happening. We got to go. Like, quit asking questions and start defending this fucking burger because the bears are coming. Yeah.
So sometimes you just need a fucking palate cleanser, you know. So that's what we're looking at. But the end of Crashlands 2 is just
maybe a couple palate cleansers. Our palate is so dirty right now. It needs a good cleansing. But as we lead up to Crashlands 2 launch, we thought let's just throw it out there to the community to get questions about Crashlands 2. No holds barred. Just what are people wanting to know, or what are people just willing to ask?
Yeah,
in
the
some
development
cases.
of it, what's in it, why we decided to do certain things, why we didn't decide to do other things, who's doing what, industry stuff related to it.
And a lot of these are going to be speculative because not nobody's, but a lot of people haven't played the game yet. And so we threw this question
if you're
out.
a beta tester, make sure you don't have any spoilers in your question.
Yeah. Of course, if there are, we won't bring them up on here. But yes, we just threw the question out to the Discord server, which is over at discord.gg/bscotch, to get a sampling of questions that people want to know the answers to, and we're just gonna go through them. So normally our questions come from podcast.bscotch.net, but it's a special time, so we're just
sourcing them direct.
Yeah. So the first question comes from Drunken Slav, who says, are there plans for co-op? Co-op in Crashlands 1 was honestly my favorite part of it and allowed me to play it with my little sister.
So I love that. You're one of 0.1% of people who experienced the co-op.
Yeah, and the people who played it, I think, really liked it.
Yeah. I think the trick is so context is important here as far as like why that's even in the original game. Because that was also not remotely planned.
It was not there at launch.
It was not there at launch. It was not there for years, actually. I think it was like 3 years later when the Switch came out.
That was closer than that because I think we launched in Switch in 2017.
It was just the next year.
It was just next year. Okay.
Yeah.
So
but it took about that long to add it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because like basically in order to do it, we had to already have a bunch of other things in place from like controller support and some other stuff.
Because we didn't have controller support at launch either.
Correct. We had no controller support.
And that took that by itself took I think like 6 fucking weeks to do because turns out that if you don't plan for that, it's not fun to put in after the fact. Yeah. So it was one of those things where like we had no intention of putting that in even at the start. But then once we had the controller support in, we talked to Nintendo about the possibility of bringing Crashlands over. And as every platform that has infinite money and no risk in terms of like us bringing a game to them does, they say, you know what, you need to invest more in order for us to allow you.
We need to feel special. We need something
special. Nintendo's like, I'm a big baby and
I need my butt powdered.
I need my butt powdered. Yep. And so we're like, we'll powder your butt. Okay, fine. Like, we'll figure out how to do this where we somehow give you couch co-op. We'll give you a thing. We'll make it so that the Switch launch is the timing of this arrival of this special thing, right?
Yeah. So everybody's going to get it, but it's like because we're going to Switch, you know. So
and they were very happy with this. We were not.
Yeah, because like we can't just bring a game that people like onto our platform and then we as Nintendo just get a bunch of money from each sale. That's not enough.
Yeah,
there's got to be a new thing, thing.
And by the way, for anybody who's like not making games for a living, this is always what it looks like. Not to get the game on the platform these days. These days,
and we're ragging on Nintendo, but like this is just universal.
Every one of these billion-dollar companies who's going to take 30% of all the money you make
they need more.
They're just like, you know what? We're not feeling special enough. Could you put some new stuff in here?
Yeah,
just for
but
us.
It's a two-part because one is they might require that just to get on the platform. So that's one possibility, right? So in this case, that was at that time for Nintendo Switch.
That was how we
probably still could have gotten on the platform, but that's where the other part comes in, which is are they going to feature you when you launch? Because if you launch on any platform with no support of any kind from the platform, you might as well not launch. Yeah. Nobody sees your game.
Yeah. Importantly, we could have probably just launched on Switch.
Yeah,
correct.
It's just that this is the quid pro quo, right? Of like we will consider featuring your game.
Well, and we got to be in the
stuff,
Indie Direct before we launched, and we got to go to Nintendo HQ as part of their like indie pool because we played
that was for Levelhead.
That's true. That was for Levelhead. That's true.
Yeah, we didn't really get any of that for Crashlands.
That was just our way of building a relationship with Nintendo, right? Yeah. But again,
this is stuff you got to do when you don't have a blockbuster.
It's business, okay? It's just business.
Yeah, because if you're fucking in Rocket League and you're like, hey, Nintendo, we're thinking about making a Switch version.
Even then, you'll see this whenever one of these huge games comes over, they'll be like, there's an Xbox skin, there's a skin that you can get just when you're playing on Xbox. And it's like, come on, guys.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's hard to tell how much of that is on behalf of the developer wanting to do it, or if it's the platform saying we're not going to feature Rocket League unless you do.
I think it sits in the middle, which is because I think everybody does. I think everybody does what we do, which is because you have to pitch, right? And you're like, okay, we want to bring this to your platform. So especially if you're talking like Xbox or consoles in general, right? It's like there's a pitch phase. And again, this is not necessarily just to get on the platform, though. For Xbox, I'm pretty sure you still have to do that. But it's to make sure that the platform is going to give you some kind of support, right? Yeah. So you got to pitch something. And every time we've done it.
This is leaving out the whole fact that these storefronts, again, with basically infinite money, have neglected any discovery tool mechanism whatsoever to create a broken store in which featuring is the only mechanism by which you can make sales as an independent developer, thereby making it impossible for us to just launch a game without doing more work on their behalf anyways in the first place. But I just want to get there.
Okay,
This is why we have to do it.
Yeah, disregarding that.
They're too busy spending money on shitty AI products and stock buybacks.
You gotta put AI in there.
So because there is no store discovery, then if we're going to be on a store, we have to get store support. Otherwise, again, we might as well not have launched on it. And so every time we pitch one of our games to the stores, to sweeten the deal, we always put in something. We're always like, here's the unique thing for your platform, or not necessarily a unique thing. We'll be like, we're going to leverage this technology
I would say
you love so much. Or
I would say largely we don't pitch initially with it. We're always
we can help it. Yeah, sure.
We basically say, hey, we want to bring this over. And then they're like, when are you going to
put this shit on the blockchain?
Yeah.
So, which we have gotten that.
So that was basically the conversation with Nintendo. They're like, what can you give us? So we were like, we don't want to add more stuff because we didn't want to touch the game at that point. The shit was like, Crashlands was so close to just imploding all the time that, anytime we touched it, we were terrified. So
it's called Crashlands for a reason.
Yeah. So we're like, we don't want to add more content in the progression stream because that's like a whole other thing.
We did for Xbox though, because on Xbox we added the axe box, which I don't remember what that is.
It's a box that has an axe in it, and the axe pops out and it whips back and forth and chops things.
It's actually pretty dope.
Which was actually it wasn't too tough to add because we already had an axe asset, and so then we just reused that axe, and that is the axe that pops out and then it chops back and forth.
So basically we were like, okay, we'll I guess figure out some couch co-op thing if that would get you guys excited. And they were very excited. So we're like, okay, if that's our means of securing, this actually being a good idea, then we'll go figure that out. So that's like the context there. It was never the plan at all from the jump with the original Crashlands.
And then we needed to be able to have the game be co-op when it wasn't designed for that, which meant we had to figure out what does co-op look like. And this was around when which Mario game was that where you play as the hat? Yeah.
Yep.
This is around when that game came out with that hugely asymmetrical couch co-op sort of aspect. Mm-hmm. And we were like, oh, this is a thing I guess we're allowed to do is have this.
We thought about it's little sister, little brother mode. It's like, you want to play together, but you don't want them messing up, progression. You don't want
gamer
them
plus non
give them some buttons to push.
So that is the route we took with it. We don't have any plans for that with Crashlands 2. If we did, it would basically be the same. It'd be the same approach, which is just like give Juicebox some buttons because Juicebox is the only person who's with you all the time, right? But we don't have any plans. We don't have any plans for that. If Nintendo calls and they're like, hey, that looks good. We got the Switch 2 coming out. It'd be great if you guys could put it on there. But, we only have a couple $2 billion and we don't feel special enough. So if you could put couch co-op in this one too, maybe we'll do it. I don't know.
Or Xbox.
That's a hard
pass. If it feels like that's the only way we could get on Xbox Game Pass. Basically consoles, things where people are playing with multiple players.
Yeah. Well, I think importantly, especially on the Switch, a vast majority of the revenue generated on that platform is first-party titles. So Nintendo's own games, which almost unilaterally get featuring above everything else. And so, it is so tough to even if we were to spend like a month adding couch co-op to Crashlands 2. Mm-hmm. so that we could launch it on, say, like the Switch 2. It would be a huge gamble, actually, in terms of cost benefit. Like it would be hard to say whether we would make our money back.
And this is why it's one of those things where like there's always a bajillion pie in the sky ideas about like where you could take a game, right? Especially when you're at the end of dev. There's also, like, as we were mentioning earlier, in the course of like a 5-year dev cycle, being like kind of tired of it and wanting to build something else.
Yeah.
So what happens at launch is what determines then what, if anything, we do. Combined with the fact that it's been 5 years, and so we're like, if it goes bonkers, then you can actually count on like, oh yeah, if we manage to get it on something like Switch 2 or something like that, then you can kind of count on it actually selling well enough to make it worth having. If we adding something fun, right?
If you got 30,000 people chomping at the bit to get the game on Switch, then great.
Yep.
So
there's a lot of these things where it's like,
maybe not.
Yeah, there's these things like this where it's like it's better to on the dev side to like wait until the business case proves itself before you bother doing like kind of more zany small percent player based stuff, right?
Yeah, right. Basically anything that would impact a small fraction of players. Is you got to have a solid. It's the same logic as like which languages do you translate into, right? And that's a matter of how costly is it to do a given language, and does it seem like there's going to be enough of a market to pay off the costs associated with that?
Things I do like the couch co-op and Crash. It's fun. It's like it's a funny player 2 thing,
It's fun. I mean, we have it in Levelhead. Like couch co-op is whenever you have it, it's fun. It's really hard to say whether or not that adds to the marketability of the game or grows the audience, because like so many people nowadays just don't play same screen co-op anymore. It's fallen out of favor as couch gaming has sort of slowed. Couch gaming with other people. That's kind of
I know you have studios like Hazelight who's doing split fiction and It Takes Two, right? But it's important to note that those are the scale of those things to pull people in to play together are like, I don't know, those are tremendously incredible games in terms of scale and budget, right? Like they're very big, very beautiful, very zany, and like it's harder. It'd be a very big. It's a gamble for anybody. I mean, right before they launched It Takes Two, everyone's like, yeah, couch co-op is entirely dead. You would never make just a 2-person game, and then they did, and it went bonkers. And now they're the
anytime there's conventional wisdom like that, it's generally wrong, right? But
it's sort of right, and that's
it's that the games market is big enough, right? That even a minority subset of it, like people who want to play couch co-op games with exactly one other person. Well, yeah, exactly one, and not even 0 other people, right? But exactly one other people.
Yes,
that's a tiny fraction of people who play games, right? But there's like what 1 billion people who play video games, right? So it's if you can capture a huge fraction of that tiny fraction, that's a large number of players actually, and you can support a small business with that. You can't support a AAA game with that, but you could support a high scaled,
I guess you call like double A's. It's not like the $500 million budget, but they're very expensive.
Yeah, but it kind of presupposes like that there's a market, and then like games just appear to meet the market, and in a lot of cases, games create a market.
Yeah,
like they create awareness of something, and people are like, oh, I didn't realize like this type of thing could be so much fun. Like WoW did this with MMOs. Like it was a tiny thing. And then suddenly WoW has 12 million subscribers. People are like, I didn't think there were that even close to that many people interested in this type of thing. So every now and then something comes along that just kind of breaks the mold as an incredible kind of experience that then violates all the conventions. But yeah, you can't necessarily take that as a green light, as a signal that if you made that
exactly
type of a thing, that you'd be able to hit that same threshold. Yeah. So, anyways,
so these are also the ones you hear about too, right? It's like I don't know what the full list of co-op only games are that got launched, right? Yeah. There's that survivorship bias problem always.
Yeah. There might be 10,000 co-op games buried on Steam, and then the one that made it was Split Fiction. You don't hear about the games that nobody hears about. That's their nature.
That works. Yep.
So we're not writing it off for Crashlands 2.
We're not writing it in.
We're not planning on it.
Yeah.
So, but we'll remain open-minded. Next question comes from Carbs, who says, "Will there be gay people in the game?" Probably the sexual orientation of the characters is not really explored in Crashlands 2.
They are aliens, so
So they're not straight then, probably. You know what I mean? Like, because there's the human version of straight is like very narrow. I feel like everything else falls into kind of like the queer LGBTQ.
I mean, what would you call the sexual orientation of a mushroom?
Well, this is the problem. So, as a specific example, because I've also been thinking about this from a localization standpoint, because we have to, because in order for characters to talk about each other, in English we have to use pronouns, and pronouns are gendered for some stupid fucking reason, right? Which means we have to choose genders for characters that we don't care what their gender is. Right?
They're an alien that emerged from a flesh sack, and we're like, it's he.
Yeah. So we just have to
what?
So in Crashlands 2, Flux is the only human, the only one.
Yeah.
Right. So she's the only one where like any human concepts even just directly apply. But everything that happens in the game is conveyed through human language. And so we have to still like do all this stuff, right? So I'm just going to pick one case because I think it's interesting, which is the Tendrom as a species is canonically this like plant-like kind of a creature, right? Where like they kind of look mammally, right? But they're better approximated as plants in terms of like what their life cycle looks like.
It's a flying plant goat.
It's a flying plant goat. They canonically do not sexually reproduce. So there's not a male and female like category of Tendrom, right? They're kind of, and it's not quite as simple as that either. They're like kind of monoclonally asexual, if that is kind of like their biological category. So like when they die, they plant their roots, and their roots like mix together. They plant them together, right? And then you get new things that come out. So it's like
they have grandchildren and children.
Yeah, they have filial relationships.
But they more kind of like, right? There's some kind of like bend towards some particulars or another as they
have kind of like they have like an understanding of their heritage.
Yeah.
But they aren't necessarily like raised by their direct parents.
And their direct parents are not like mom and dad. They're like
correct.
They're like 7 conveyors of roots or whatever the fuck, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So now you take that case and then you ask a question like, what are their genders? So we know what pronouns to assign. It's like, well, gender doesn't have to apply in this case, does it? They're agender, right? And then also, what is their sexual orientation? Which again also doesn't apply because they don't have sex, right? So doesn't apply. So then what do we do? So I think to me, this is one of the fun things about sci-fi spaces is you can explore these concepts, but you get to be like, these are aliens though. So like, what would these things mean?
Yeah.
And then it's super fun. There are a lot of great sci-fi novels, especially recently, that like really have a good time exploring that space.
Well, I think it's fun because it reveals how, especially in the case like dealing with aliens in Crashlands, how odd it is to sort of like interrogate them along some of these like ideological lines, right?
Yeah, because importantly, like this question could have been, will there be straight people in the game? And we don't really know the answer to that question.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's like,
because we don't, it's robots and aliens mostly.
Yeah, which is like, it's a playground at which somebody could explore those concepts, right? We just aren't. We're just not exploring the concepts. So, but we had to explore them just enough, mostly so we could write the text and have it translated, and also convey this information to our translators so they have some ideas of how to proceed, right? Mm-hmm. But the short answer is there's only one human character, Flux. She does not have a canonical sexual orientation. We've never specified.
I don't think we've specified him.
And we're not going to do it today either, right? So
it's just never been relevant to the game.
Yeah, well, yeah. And again, someday that might be something we decide for some reason to like make a decision about, but we don't have a decision about that either, right? There's not a canon that we have that we just haven't said yet. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the other thing about storytelling in fiction, especially in games where things tend to be a little story light, is we don't want to have to decide stuff if we can help it, because anything that we decide is something we don't have room to play in.
It's a closed path now. There's no path.
And so I think these kinds of questions of like, again, stuff that we could explore and may explore in like other kinds of media, other games, that kind of stuff, right? But until we have decided to explore them on purpose, our preference is to just
not bother.
Leave them big question marks, right? Which is different than what most other like what others will do, they'll be like, well, let's just default these to like conceptually straight or something like that, right? We're not doing that. We're defaulting things to conceptually. We don't know. We don't
conceptually.
know.
Yeah,
Alien actually is.
For the most part, aliens
stuff.
and robots. Yeah, exactly. It's
well,
mostly
and I think the
not applicable.
the cultural tendency that a lot of people have to default things to straight male. I think it's kind of exemplified by Warhammer orcs and goblins.
Yeah, they're a great example. Yeah.
So Warhammer orcs and goblins, canonically, I believe, reproduce through spores. They're actually mushrooms.
Yep.
Right.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
But also the way that they're described is they don't have females. They only have males, but also they reproduce through spores, which means the concept of male doesn't fucking mean anything.
Yeah, it doesn't apply.
Right? Yeah. But since you got to pick one, then of course they're
well, so
males.
the thing is, like, again, from an art standpoint, you're thinking about it conceptually, which is like, from aggressive, like strong characters in this case, doing like orcs feeling like big and terrifying is like a
which of course is male.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why
despite the fact that a female gorilla will tear your face right off of your body.
Oh, just right off.
So
like,
being strong and violent, again, species dependence. Like you could play around in that space a lot.
Yeah, because it's not even applying like Earth defaults. It's actually just applying human imposed defaults,
yes.
right?
Yeah. So,
it's a cool topic. It's interesting to think about. And there are a lot of games that actually intentionally, specifically explore it, at least to some level, which is, I think it's just a fun, cool space to have that stuff in. But Crashlands 2 isn't doing that. It's exploring capitalism.
Yeah. Well, ecology, aliens, all sorts of weird shit.
Sustainability, kindness, I am excited for the people pissed off about the game being woke, because that's, of course, people find this in anything that they look at, and they get mad because it has things in it. Just things, just people, stories.
Yeah, well, because we do use non-binary singular they them, right, for some of the characters, which again is because
it doesn't matter,
have the concept of gender. So but it's actually one of the interesting, I think to me this is so interesting because it's also a linguistic thing, right? Because let's take one of the robots. Let's take, and I'm not going to get into spoilers. So there's a robot. I think I can't even say its name actually without being spoiled.
Don't do it. You shut your trap, man. We don't need to go any further. Okay.
Don't worry about it. There's a robot that doesn't have a name. Don't worry about it. There's a robot that you meet at some point in the game. A robot-like thing. We refer to it as a construct, right? And you notice that as I'm talking, I want to say it because it's a robot.
It's a robot.
Right. It's like the concept of gender doesn't apply. But in English, at least in American English, it takes away personhood, right? But
it is for objects.
It's for objects. But this robot thing is sentient, right? It's a person, right? And so it feels rude. It feels derogatory, right, in that context. And so instead, we need to have something that doesn't have that vibe. And so what's left are basically, he, she, or they, right? Mm-hmm. But he and she absolutely don't apply because it can't have a concept of gender. It's a robot. Right? Yeah. Unless we impose it externally.
Or unless the robot decided that that's what.
Yeah. Either because it wanted that for some reason, or it was just like, this would be convenient.
Because Juicebox goes by he.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we don't have a canonical explanation for why, but there are many reasons why that could be, right?
Juicebox is made by people. So it's
made by people.
easy to guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We do that to all of our things.
Human people.
Right?
Yeah, you call them boats. Boats have pronouns, for fuck's sake. Like it's not unusual for robots to.
We just gender stuff, right? So, but again, to me the most appropriate pronoun to use for this construct is it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But the next most appropriate one would be they. But they, as a sort of non-gender or non-binary gender, right, is overloaded in English because it can mean any of unspecified gender, unknown gender, agender, gender fluid. Too.
Don't even forget that.
Which one?
Well, it can also
or plural.
It's plural, but also plural of people or objects.
Yeah.
Yep. Right.
So it's this super overloaded word in terms of like.
Yeah, we do need a different pronoun for non-binary people that isn't also for so many other things, but it's hard to get it's hard enough to get people to accept using an existing word in a new way, but getting people to use a whole new word is even worse.
Well, this isn't even in a new way either, right? It's just more common. But
sure,
I guess,
it's a new idea for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so the net effect of all this is like, but we have to be able to refer to this fucking construct, right? Mm-hmm. And so we got to pick something, and then we pick something that feels like it more or less makes sense. And then it goes to translation, which has, right? So you have like romance languages that are even more intense,
strongly
fucking gendering every word in the universe, right? And so
including like tables and
just everything, right?
Like everything has to be
but also like the cultural context, because gender is cultural, right? And so the cultural context of gender and also changes over time. And so these same ideas, especially when we're talking about like aliens and shit, right? It's like, we got these aliens. We need some pronouns so people can tell what the
usually
hell's going
basically,
on.
Things come along where it's like, so like, here's how we talk about them. Here's, again, it's like Adam describing how the 10 drama actually reproduce. Like,
we just give them a bunch of info.
And we're just like, I don't know, fucking like, I don't know what that means in Japanese for you.
Yeah, I just told translators to have fun. I was like,
we're just like, go out. I don't know.
Just have fun. It doesn't matter,
But I'm sure we'll get some commentary. I mean, the thing is, the reality is like Crashlands, even the original one, had the commentary because Flux is Flux being a woman is a thing for some people.
Yeah. And there are canonically gay characters in original Crashlands.
Yep. They're humans.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the only other humans in the original Crashlands, which are Brad and somebody.
Will
and Brad.
The flop rocket astronauts.
The flop rocket crew who come to save her.
Yeah.
Or save the packages. Yeah.
That's
most important. So
they do not. I guess I think it's not as player to say those characters do not return to Crashlands 2. There are just literally no other human characters in Crashlands 2. It's just Flux.
So I guess it's one of those things where it's like, what applies on an alien planet, and we're not telling a story that cares about.
Well, I think the answer here to like the short answer to the question is just no.
Question mark.
Yeah. Actually, no, but it's actually maybe. It's probably more.
There might be gay people in the game. There might be straight people in the game. We don't fucking know. It's not really relevant to the story, and it's not really explored. So whatever you want to imagine.
Again, Flux is not canonically straight either, right? So if you think that she is because like you're defaulting to that, like she does canonically, we don't have an answer to that question.
We haven't decided yet.
Yeah. Flux is just canonically a badass. That's basically as far as that goes. All right. Next question comes from Mist, who says, I would love an in-depth explanation of how you looked back to Crashlands 1 and innovated on it to give us the wonderful Crashlands 2.
Oh.
Sometimes I would say originally we innovated too far. There were a number of things that we looked at where we were like, let's just not do that at all or do it completely different. And then we ended up kind of circling back and then just doing a bunch of improvements on the original instead of just going a totally different direction.
Yeah, I think part of it is the like kind of structurally what we did was there was in the pre-production phase, we looked back at all the reviews for the original game because part of understanding, trying to figure out what you're going to build is basically what a pre-production is about. Like actually going into development with as clear a picture as you can have, but like before you've built something, knowing what the fuck you're trying to build, right? And the problem was that one of the things we always had trouble with Crashlands was actually in just describing it at all, like in the first place. We joked about this, like probably listened to some of those episodes around lunchtime. Like we could never figure out how to talk about it because it had like it had just like too much going on, but also not a super steep, not a super like steeply defined identity in.
It's not one thing. It's like it's just a mishmash of 10 things.
Yeah, because it's this big, it is a big, sci-fi adventure, but that's so vague. And then Flux is like a delivery driver, right? But there's no delivery mechanics in the game. The story is about that, but like,
the game is one whole delivery mechanic,
Yeah, the game is all about delivering a package, but like you don't deliver things in any.
And it is an open world game, but like actually there is a story that you move through linearly because that's how stories and time works. And so like. The world is open, but the story is linear.
Yeah. And so
and crafting is linear, So.
Yeah. You craft one thing to make the next thing.
We had this trouble then, like while we were making it, talking about it, and then even years afterwards, being able to know what it was. And so the first step was basically looking back at reviews, both on like literally Steam and the like Metacritic reviews and stuff, trying to pull out basically what the heck we had built, right? So that we could then essentially for Crashlands 2 take that kind of like DNA, that kind of identity that we had established in a way that was kind of hard to nail down for the first one, and actually kind of like distill it in a way that let us talk about it in a bit easier format, right? And so that's where we, like, a lot of it became honed in on this idea of like, yeah, you Flux, you're like a delivery driver, you work for the Bureau of Shipping, whatever. But actually, one of the core things about it is like doing these adventures in the service of all these interesting aliens on this interesting planet, right? So it ends up being about like ecology and friendship actually are like at the core of the thing, which is not how I would think about the original game when we made it, and it's not how we talked about it ever, but it's like a survival game that is not at all about surviving, but it's about thriving and like learning all about a new planet and meeting all these zany characters and stuff, right? The crafting is mechanically what we're doing, but like it could have been anything else, you know what I mean? Because it's not super, the crafting is a way of making the ecology important, right? So the first step was basically that.
And it's a complicated way of progressing.
Yeah, very complicated.
Your character, you know.
Especially the way we did it, right?
Yeah. It's not just like you level up and now you got +2 strength. It's like you needed to go do a quest and get all this stuff and collect all these resources and build a thing, and that gives you +2 strength, you know.
So then once we kind of had done some of that work to distill and figure out like what even was that, then we look at the critiques. So, okay, if we look along all of the major features that we had, if you think about them as like big bullets, so combat, story, pets, base building, for any given one of those, what are the main complaints people have, as well as like what on the highest level is the complaint people have about the game? Where's the whole game falling apart, right? Even though it was successful. And so we did a few rounds of like thinking about that, parsing those out. And then that's where we basically said, okay, obviously if it's a sequel, you kind of have to have the stuff. You can't just like drop a whole system that was somehow core to this. So we probably need to bring all of these major features, these major systems over, the base building, the crafting, whatever. How, given what we know about how the game was failing on a high level, or maybe just didn't quite do what we wanted it to do, how can we reinterpret parts of those so that they still like keep the identity from the original, but are just better, right? From a engagement standpoint. So the game doesn't fall apart in the same way.
Yeah.
And that's point. That's where stuff, I think, in the pre-production phase, because it's not necessarily about putting things into code at that juncture. It's meant to be exploratory as fast as possible, which is essentially concept, whether that's verbal or written or like almost like paper prototypes, you know. There was a bunch of things we explored along, like changes to base building, changes to pets, changes to combat, that were basically dead ends. Like they were too far afield from where we actually needed to go.
But I will say though, like I think the base building for me is
that's the core
most
one.
Interesting example.
A bunch of questions.
Because if we look back to the original Crashlands, and this is still the case, like people will be like, look at my base, and they post a screenshot of their base from the original Crashlands. And every time I see those, I'm like, this is cool because of like all the variety of stuff and all the things people put in there. But the complaint that we got from critics and stuff like that about the base building in the first game was it didn't really feel like you're making a base.
Yeah.
Like the walls were kind of like short little stumpy rectangles.
There's no roofs. Okay.
There's no roofs. And so it was like base building in quotes, you know, like you could put a lot of stuff all over the place, but it still doesn't feel like you're building like a house or a building. Right. And so, as we were kind of thinking through those problems, and we're like, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you have roofs? And so we looked to games like Pokemon, where like you would have these little buildings, you know, in a town, and have a little door hole, right? And you walk into the door and suddenly you're in a different space. There's like an interior of the building and there's like characters in there or whatever. And sometimes they'll have like multiple stories. Like you go up little stairs and then now you're upstairs, right? So it's actually like creating like instanced little
TARDIS approach, right? It's like bigger inside than it is on the outside. And you go into a different room essentially, right? From the main place.
So that was kind of our initial thinking, was to approach it like that, where there are just wholesale buildings just out there in the world. And when you enter the door, then you're in a different space. But then as we kind of translate that over to stuff like build mode, where the player can themselves build a base, it's like, well, how the fuck do you do that then if like...
Is it building a village at that point? Because that's what that sounds like, right?
Yeah, because then we're like, all right, well, maybe you're just like, you're actually like building the entire building in one go.
Yeah.
Like as a
It's like an RTS. You're like, hey, I want a village house. I want a pub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would put that there. And so then you would have like these characters and you would like get all these materials and stuff. And the big moment for that character would be like building their house. And then that allows them to move into your, not your base, but more like your compound.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you would have like your own building in your compound. And then as you got new followers, they would each have their own entire building. The problems with that then come from like, well, for starters, if you give the player free form ability to put buildings wherever they want, then that opens up a huge can of worms of like, are there places where buildings shouldn't be allowed? Or like, what if pathfinding breaks because people put buildings in a certain way and then, blah, blah, blah. But then also it would feel really, really weird to be like, I need to build a house. Bring me 2 sticks and a rock. Right. And so instead, it's like, bring me 100 sticks, 300 planks of
incremental
you
progress.
Can't make exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And so it felt really weird where it was like nothing happens for a long time and suddenly there's a building. And on top of that, it kind of takes away the creative aspect, which is like if the building is pre-made in a certain way, like we have this character Grawl, who's the first like buddy that you come across in Crashlands 2. Well, Grawl is a 10 drum, and if we ourselves pre-designed Grawl's house, it would have a certain look to it that would fit Grawl as a character, right? Which means that everybody's Grawl house would just look the same. And so then all those cool screenshots would be like, look at my base, and they can share what they built. That goes away in this model, right?
Yeah. So you might say, so we didn't code this up, right? This is just like a bunch of basically conceptual iteration and then like poking around on like some essentially paper prototypes, right? So just like putting some assets together and seeing like, what would it mean? Because you're trying to get the gist of it.
Yeah. You have a sense of what the implications would be, but until it's all like right there in front of you, it's kind of hard to really.
Yeah. So it might be funny from a player standpoint. So you've played Crashlands demo, being like looking at it, being like, well, obviously that would be a bad idea. Like obviously that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like with most design things, especially when you're trying to get at a more vague quality. So like, how do you establish the sense that like you coming to this planet and making friends, right, and like building a community is like a thing. And it's like, oh, if you literally build a village, that actually kind of is in line with it. The original game has building, right? Technically. So like it is a hop, skip, and a jump, but it's actually not like completely far afield, right? And so a lot of that early time then was doing this kind of exploratory work to be like taking one of the ideas, drilling or like going up to that really high level, what we're trying to do, checking in with like the DNA of the game, the spirit of it, coming back down with now like 5 different possible avenues, talking through them, trying out some like just paper stuff. And typically, as I was mentioning, like realizing that if we go too far from the original concept, then
if our problem is things should look like buildings, then how do we take OG Crashlands build mode, keep it almost as is, and still have things that look like buildings, right?
And again, that wasn't the core problem, because it's like, again, that's an easy answer. It's like, how do you make stuff look like buildings on a grid? But if the question is instead like, how do you make base building actually important, which was the fundamental question, because it wasn't important in the original game, like it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Then that's a much weirder.
Well, and we also talked about stuff like because Terraria has this mechanism where like you make a base, and then again the game doesn't really. I don't think it explains this. It's just something that you have to like look up or whatever. But if you make a room, which is an enclosed space, right, and then you put like a chair table, and a light, then that qualifies as a livable space. And then at some arbitrary point in time, an NPC just shows up and lives there now.
Yeah, or you find them out in the world, and then once you found them, if they have a room they can go into that's open, then they'll show up in your base after you found them.
Yeah. And so we had talked about that kind of a thing where it was like you might meet people in the world, and then just like in Terraria, if your base has space for them, if it has a room that's configured for them to live in, then they'd be willing to move in, right? But that still kind of gets at the question of what is a room? How do you know what a room is and what's in that room?
Well, and on an even higher level, it gets in the question of, from a reference standpoint, what game is this game like? And that was the thing that was always so hard to answer, because you look at it and it was like, oh yeah, people are like, oh yeah, it's like Don't Starve, except it's like Don't Starve, but it like really is not like Don't Starve. That's what we heard a bunch right the first one. Or it's like Terraria, except it's not a lot like Terraria.
Yeah.
So the thing is, if we're using crafting open world games as reference points for how to do something like the building system, that leads you down one of these paths, right? But it turns out that those paths, time and time again, were like not the right ones. Mostly, it was actually going down more like an RPG companion path, which is where it ended up, right?
Well, because in Terraria, it's like, why are these people out there, and why are they so willing to move in with you?
Hand wave.
Video game, right?
Yep.
But for Terraria, it's because they're literally out in the wilderness or deep in a cave. So they've got, in terms of like why would they want to move in with you, it's like they don't have a house.
Yeah, some of them just show up.
Show up.
So, and also, as we were talking to the implications of this for Crashlands 2, we're like, if we're going out of our way to have like quests and stories and characters that have meaningful things going on and stuff, and then just like you come across somebody who's just like, hey, can I move in? Right? There's got to be a reason for that, you know, like you got to explain it more because
right, and that works in Terraria because there isn't a reason for anything, right? There's not,
stuff's just happening.
There's not enough story.
And so even that idea of like pre-building rooms or spaces, which like personally I have an opposition to, because I don't like how hand wavy and opaque it is in a game like Terraria, where it's like, how would I know that? How would I know that I'm supposed to do that without just going to a wiki or watching videos or something like that? And so in Crashlands 2, it's kind of flipped around where you meet certain characters and they have a good reason to like need a place to stay and a place to crash, right? And over time, you learn more about them, and
become actual close companions, like RPGs.
And they ask for certain arrangements to be made about their space, and to do that, then we have like a lot of code to develop where like rooms don't just know that they're a room; they also have a lot of information about the arrangement and relationships of items within that room. Like we know whether you have like 3 lights close together or whether you've got like 6 different types of barrels, or which workstations are in there and how close together they are. And so those relationships can be interrogated and those are then hooked into for these different characters where they, you know, they'll ask, in some cases they'll ask for pretty specific things. Like pretty specific arrangements of things, you know? And so that allows the base building to actually have a mechanical tie-in other than just being like, it's just a space.
It's just a vague room
where you've put stuff.
So I think on a high level, again, to come back to the question itself, like how do you go from Crashlands 1 to Crashlands 2? It's basically, this is why it took a long time. It's figuring out what even is Crashlands 1, and then not just doing that again, but then translating it into what we think is something.
What's the meaningful idea or essence behind a certain thing?
Yeah.
You know? I think fishing is also a pretty good example.
Yeah.
Because we talked about this, I think maybe like 4 or 5 episodes ago or something, which was for the longest time in Crashlands 2, we had a change to the fishing game where like you could just fish in open water. You can just cast anywhere, which is already different from the first Crashlands. Because the first Crashlands, you needed to find little ripples, like schools of fish to fish in. And once you fished them up, they were depleted and you couldn't fish there anymore. So in a way, like in the first game, fishing was pretty analogous to just general resource harvesting. Because for general resource harvesting, you have to go find the tree and then chop it and it's done. Yeah. And so we were like, well, how do we kind of have still have that vibe in Crashlands 2 where like when you find the spot to fish, it's like, ooh, there's fish here, right? But also allow fishing to be something that you can actually just kind of chill out and just do. Like if you just wanted to fish for 20 minutes, can you just do that without having to go hunting for spots, you know? And so we introduced this open water fishing idea. But it always kind of sucked because our implementation of it was totally different from Crashlands 1. It was more of a waiting game. Like you'd cast your line at a certain point.
It was Terraria style.
Well, we went a little too far on the you can just chill and do this. You know what I mean? Like There's nothing going on. It's too,
it was too brainless. And so just before the beta, actually, we were like like in each of our playthroughs before the beta, the fishing always came up as this annoyance. Mm-hmm. It was like anytime I had to fish, I'm just bummed out about it.
It wasn't a thing you did to do. It was a thing that you did because you needed
if you felt like you had to do it,
and you would do it exactly the amount that you needed. And
once you got what you needed, you're like, oh fuck, thank God, I'm done with this.
And I think important,
which is a bad sign,
It is, but I think like that feels like at first blush natural for a crafting game where you have to go harvest resources, right? But none of the rest of the harvesting in Crashlands is like that. Like when I need to go get stuff that's not fishing stuff, if I need like 10 popwoods or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I would go out on my popwood harvesting run. And while I'm doing it, I just keep going. I also harvest other stuff while I'm at it. Like I'm just harvesting everything, even though I don't need it right now.
Yeah, the whole design of it's supposed to make it so you could just like
you're just happily out there vibing, you know?
Fishing was not doing that.
It was not that, which also kind of there's a lot of economics reasons as well behind that, because like you're saying, if you're harvesting popwood or whatever, then you're also collecting other types of things. And when you're fishing, you're only fishing. You're not fishing and chopping trees in between casts like you're just fishing. And so the fishing really needed to stand on its own. And we ended up going back to something that was a lot more similar to the fishing game from the first Crashlands. A little bit like aesthetically stylized, but pretty dang similar. There were some cases where
it's basically the same.
Yeah, so there were some cases where we went back to the first Crashlands. We identified a problem that we wanted to solve. We solved that problem, but in so doing, we created a different problem that we then had to solve. And usually we would kind of go loop back around and kind of meet somewhere in the middle, like somewhere like the first game, but then with some new twists on it.
It's because it's kind of all has to do with discovery, right? So it's hard to know as you're changing these things, then all of them cause like echoes in all the rest of the designs, even like how the character moves, or the fact that Flux has telegraphs and you aim them. Humongous departure in terms of like what that means for everything. And so it's the fact that you're not just changing one thing and then sort of handling that echo across existing systems that you already know about. It's actually starting with something that's already kind of different and then conceptualizing how to pull basically a core aspect of something from the original forward in a way that solves problems that it had while now meeting this new like fabric that it's got to be put into. And then you're just doing that for all of them simultaneously, right? So it's like the number of systems that Crashlands is just insane, right? It's just such a complicated thing. And that's part of the reason why, as we joked about at the top of the hour, it's like we just want to do some small stuff for a little bit because it is so intense, like quilting this thing together, right? And
it makes everything's a big deal, Yeah,
because it all touches.
If we're just like, hey, we want to like add 2 new gadgets to the game, like conceiving of what those gadgets would be very fast and easy. But creating the gadgets themselves of like, oh yeah, what's it going to do? It's going to like freeze things, or it's going to teleport you, or pretty dang fast and easy. And then you got to get to the question of, all right, where does this go? How does the player get it? Is it crafted? What's it made of? Is it what else is around there? Obviously, it needs to be translated.
Is there a quest tie-in? Is there stories?
Are there quests? Yeah. So suddenly there's all these like huge integration problems that you got to tackle. So you can't just put something in.
I think we solved a lot of the like again a lot of the problems we had in previous games was the first 2 steps were hard also. So the whole like we can just think about it, we could just make this gadget, it's cool shit, right? We couldn't do that particularly effectively previously.
But it's the Jevons paradox, Like we made it easy enough to just make things at the base level that we needed to give ourselves problems somewhere, right? So we made instead like the whole game has many more systems that are much more intricately connected to each other, which means that it's fast to make stuff, but it still takes a while to evaluate and make a bunch of decisions about exactly how to layer that in. And there's other kind of weird,
and its impact on everything else once it's in there.
And there's other odd considerations, like let's say a month after Crashlands 2 comes out, we release a patch where we add in 10 new like types of items that you can use, like gadgets and trinkets and stuff. If you are toward the end of the game at that point, then if you aren't paying attention to the patch notes or whatever, then you won't know that those are there necessarily. Some of them might be like in quests that you go talk to people out in the world, and you're already past that point, so it doesn't affect anything for you. And so there's also a lot of considerations there about,
or you might just suddenly have their recipes because we did put them in quest
because you researched something in the past or whatever. Yeah. So there's all these weird considerations where once you have an existing player base, adding new items to the game may not even affect the game in a meaningful way for a significant number of players who are already past that part.
This is true for any game that has progression that's stored over time. Versus this roguelike where you can introduce new stuff and everybody gets to experience it on their next run, right?
Yeah, this is why we're really that stupid meme of like the dude like with his girlfriend like looking back at the other girl and she's like all upset about it or whatever. I feel like that's not us with like making roguelikes versus
making tiny stupid games versus trying to make game of the year.
Where we're just like, it'd be nice. It'd be nice to just take a minute and be like, let's just make something that you can just kind of jump into, play, have a great fucking time, and then if like any day that we spend working on it adds meaningful content that people can get at right away without it needing to go through like so many layers of integration and consideration.
Yeah, I think it's like making Crashlands 2 has been just fascinating. I think from the jump, but it's been very hard because it's a big, complicated thing, and we wanted to do it so much better than we did the first time. So it's just been, I'm very excited. Everybody play it. The beta went great. It's like I'm really pumped to see what happens around the launch time. But I think it's also just true that like that's a lot of thinking, a lot of work. We did top to bottom.
Our brains are like dried out raisins right now. There's we got nothing left.
Really hope it paid off and people actually play. And again, we're extremely excited about the result of all of that.
It's great.
It's very good, and I can't wait to see people experience how good it is. But it's the weird thing about being the people who made a thing, it's
a bit of a curse, right?
It's often you can't even tell that it's good. But in this case, like we can tell. But even when you can tell that it's good, you're still just like, but also I'm a little tired of it.
I want to move on to a new phase of. I mean, it took long enough to make that it has been a phase of life for us. Yeah. It took longer than a college degree to put this fucking thing together. And I'm super proud of it. I think it's the best thing we've ever done.
100%.
Also, can't wait to be done.
I just can't wait to see what happens. Too long.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. This past week and then like in these next few weeks, since we're in the like move slow and don't break anything mode, it has given us time to kind of like start spinning the gears on like what else we want to do, what else we want to make, stuff like that. So I think we have been doing a lot of excess thinking just about like what it's been like to work on Crashlands 2 and how we want the next game to go differently in terms of like what it feels like to work on it. And I think that's the big thing. Making something that is simpler, easier to pick up and put down, fewer integration problems, faster to create and get out there. Still very good because we're not in the business of making garbage.
Nope.
But we gotta save up energy for the next 6 years or whatever before we start working on Crashlands 3.
Yep. Well, and each Crashlands game takes twice as long as the prior one.
Yeah,
so Crashlands 3 will be out.
We also have to hope that Crashlands 2 generates enough revenue along with
to cover 10 years of run.
To cover 10 years of development for the next game.
So we can make Crashlands 3, which will be out in 2040.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you all for the questions. We have an announcement pinned in our Discord over at discord.gg/bscotch. That has a thread on it that you can ask. You can throw more questions in there. We've already got a big pile of them.
Yeah, you can also ask a podcast at Butterscotch like usual. That's totally fine. But yeah, or in a podcast channel. Those are the main places. But really, they should be aggregated somewhere. So podcast at Butterscotch.net or the announcement.
The Discord.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll be just kind of focusing over the next couple of weeks leading up to the launch on people's questions about Crashlands 2. If you ask questions unrelated to Crashlands 2, we'll just throw that. We'll just
right in the bin.
So right in the bin. All right, so that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, go over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. Head over to the App Store and pre-order.
Yep.
And head over to Google Play and pre-register. And all those things will help boost the game on launch day and give it all the algorithmic juice that it needs. We appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.